Hi, everyone, and welcome to our chat today. I'm Jen with ARINGO. Just ready to get everybody signed in, giving you a few more minutes for everyone to get logged in. All right. So, all right. So if you can do me a favor, if you're here, just type in a message and let us know where you're from and what MBA programs you're applying for this year. We're going to wait just a few minutes until everybody joins us. All right. So, oh, perfect. I can see Selby is on and she is helping moderate. Hi, welcome to our chat today. All right. All right, so I think I'm going to go ahead and get started. And let me put on our slide for today. Okay, give me 1 second. I am going to be adding the presentation to get it to start going. All right, so give me just 1 second. I'm waiting for, was able to remove something. Hold on just 1 second, oh, there we go. Thank you, Selby. Appreciate it. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Jen Turtschanow, and I'm here from ARINGO MBA Admissions Consulting. And today we're going to be talking about everything you need to know about the MBA admission cycle. So we're going to tell you everything from A to Z that you need to know about the fun and exciting year that's upcoming for MBA admissions applications. If you have questions along the way, please use the chat here on the system, and I'll be able to try to answer them along the way. But if by chance I missed your question, please submit it again at the end, okay? All right, so we'll get started telling you a little bit about ARINGO. ARINGO MBA Admissions Consulting has been around for about 20 years, and we really focus on helping our clients get into top MBA programs across the globe with a niche focus on candidates that maybe don't have the top profile that you might see. And so with that being said, like maybe a little bit of a lower GMAT, lower GPA, or maybe a little difference in work experience, whatever it is, we're here to help you tell your story to admissions committees. And so we provide a lot of tools for our candidates, our clients, through chances estimation, helping you with every part of the application, plan out the entire process, which school to apply to when, everything that you need. We're your experts to help you with getting your application submitted and getting you that admit. So just a little bit about Ringo's statistics. As you can see, we have really strong statistics compared to the school's admit rates. These are all on our website and audited by EY every year. So you can go in and see what schools we have been admitting to and see if they kind of apply to the schools that you're interested in. Hint, it's all the top MBA programs across the globe. Awesome. So we'll dive into today's subject. So MBA admission cycle. So first, we're going to talk about the difference between like early action, early decision. We'll talk about the different rounds that you can apply in and which ones are best. And there's obviously some things that like not every school publishes or is widely known. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about those exceptions. And then afterwards, I'm going to talk to you about how to prepare for those applications, as far as like what all is involved in that process. And then we'll open up for Q&A if you have any questions related to MBA admission cycle or anything else. All right. So first, let's talk about the admission cycle. So Typically, our full-time MBA programs are going to have applications in the fall. And so they'll start having deadlines around September. And some schools will actually have what's called early action or early decision. And so sometimes that might mean that the actual application is due before the typical deadlines in September. So they might have like an August deadline. And sometimes it's just around the same September deadline, but they're calling it early action or early decision. But what you really need to know about this nomenclature is that it means that you're asking the committee to give you kind of a leg up in the process because you're most interested in that MBA program. And if you were to get admitted, that you would commit to them. There's a lot of language around this. And so I'll talk about a couple of schools that, would be part of this process, but essentially they're going to be asking you to make a commitment of, if we're going to review your application early before any other candidate, then we want to know that you're really committed to us. So some of those schools are going to be Columbia, Darden, Duke, Rotman, ISE. And so these schools, they're really looking for you to be 100% sold that this, if I got into Darden, if I got into Columbia, I would be happy. And then they would likely ask you for a substantial deposit. So let's take Columbia, for instance. So Columbia's application typically opens the earliest of most applications. And so we had a client last year who applied, got admitted, and got offered, or he submitted his application, got an interview, and was admitted all by July 25th. And so with that process, Columbia said, awesome, we love you. We want you to be part of the program. Now, in 2 weeks, we need you to make a $6,000 deposit to say that Columbia is your number one. We'll also ask you to sign an honor code commitment that you're going to drop your applications with all other schools and only pursue starting with us in the fall. So some schools like Darden, they'll ask you, are you applying, early action, early decision, or are you applying regular decision? And so that's really important that you read those fine details. People have been admitted to these early decision programs, but gone to another school. It happens. But honestly, like, they are taking the time to review your entire application before they even review anyone else. So they're dedicating this special time to you. It also usually means that you typically are going to be assigned an interview automatically. So it's really important, that you make this decision with a well thought out process. So that's early decision. And again, one other thing to know about them is that they're going to review you before they review everybody else, but they're also probably going to have an earlier timeline than most other MBA programs. So like, let's say that you're really in for Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, but you're like, oh, but I would also be really excited about Darden. Well, if you're admitted to Darden, likely through the early action or early decision process, you would likely get that offer before you even submitted your application for Stanford or Harvard or Wharton, or even before you potentially got your interview invite. So just know that this does really kind of happen very quickly, and they do ask for that substantial deposit. All right, so now let's talk about admission cycles and the rounds. I think there's a lot of talk about which round should I apply in, round one or round two. Honestly, round one and round two aren't that different. For the most part, we would say that round one is optimal for international candidates to get their applications in. Round two is pretty much the last deadline that most international candidates will apply to, but there are some exceptions to that. Statistically speaking, there's going to be more seats available and more scholarship available. However, know that most schools are going to plan their admissions statistics or admissions rate based on aggregating it for each one of their rounds. So they might say like, oh, we'll admit 60% in round one, and then, another 20% in round 2, and round 3 gets another 20%, something like that. So they might have a bit of a breakdown there, but round 1 is a strong round to apply in. It gives you a lot of ample opportunity and gives you a little bit more possibility for scholarship. Plus, you get to know if you're admitted sooner than later and start making your plans and not have to deal as much with the admissions process and all the worry. So round 1 and round 2, I would say there's not a huge difference. What I would say, if anybody asked me, should I apply in round 1 or round 2? I'm honestly going to say apply in the round that you're most ready in. So if you have a little bit of a lower GMAT score and you think if you take it one more time that you could really bring it up above the average and be in a really good spot and be very competitive in round 2 because you took a little bit more time, then awesome. Let's focus on round 2. If you are happy with everything and you're ready to go, put that application in during round 1. Now, round 3. So round 3 is typically a bit more of a domestic application cycle. And I'll say, and that's really more focused on the US schools. So US schools are going to be recruiting for US candidates during round 3. And even if they have like a round 4, they're going to be looking for primarily their domestic candidates. And so if I was a domestic candidate, would I wait all the way until round 3? I don't know. You could. But let's say that things just kind of happen and you don't have the ability to reply during round 1 or round 2. Absolutely apply during round 3. There's definitely no problem with that. Over the past 2, maybe 3 years, there's been a bit of a decline in the amount of applications coming from US candidates overall. And so this is like round 3 has been a very viable round for US candidates during this year and last year as well. So the caveat about scholarship is that technically it's probably going to be mostly already given out. However, most scholarship is divvied up per year. And so they might have, $1 million scholarship fund for this year. If they grant a scholarship to somebody in round 1 and they decline their seat, it goes back into the pot for round 2 and round 3 again. So just know that there are possibilities for scholarship during round 3. It's not always going to be a tremendous amount, but it's definitely possible to get a solid scholarship during round 3. Now, round 4, it's a little bit less typical in the top US programs, but round 4 and beyond are definitely a lot more popular in the European schools. So, like HEC Paris has essentially a deadline every month. INSEAD has more than 3. They have, I think, 5 rounds. So you have a lot of more options with the rounds in some of the UK and European schools. So you have a little bit more opportunity. And so the hard and fast rule of only applied in round 1 or 2 as an international student doesn't always apply to those schools. The other thing to note is that and I think I have this on my next slide, but Harvard only has 2 rounds. So if Harvard is what you're looking for, then you definitely need to apply in round 1 or 2 because otherwise you're going to be looking at next year. All right. So again, here's some caveats and exceptions to what I was talking about. Harvard and then open interviews. So some of the schools automatically grant or offer the opportunity for interview. Duke and Darden are 2 of the schools that will definitely do this. You can sign up for an interview before you've even submitted your application, or at least that's what's happened in the past. These applications aren't open for the fall 23 cycle yet, but in the past, that's what's been happening. And then there's some other schools that typically have a guaranteed interview. For Tuck, it's usually by a specific deadline. If you submit your application by this deadline, not the round deadline. So it's an early deadline. I think if it's usually maybe like 3 weeks before the regular deadline, then you automatically are granted an interview. Kellogg, for the most part, almost 99% of people who submit an application are viable candidates, get an interview as well. Now, a couple other caveats would be that Columbia typically doesn't have their round 1 or any sort of rounds like a typical MBA program. So what they do is they have it is called a scholarship deadline in January. So if you are looking for a fellowship, it's a fellowship deadline in January, and then their regular like full or final deadline is going to be in April. So there's not necessarily all these little deadlines in between. So you can submit your application early action, which is a designation of your application, or you could submit it the regular cycle and it'll be reviewed by January. And then after that, you have up until April to submit for Columbia. The other thing about Columbia is that they do have what's called a J term. So that means that instead of starting the traditional fall, like let's say, instead of starting in fall of 23, which is this upcoming fall, you would start in January of 24 and catch up with the students that started in this fall, but you would miss out on the internship opportunity. And so it's a really great opportunity for candidates who don't need an internship, maybe family business or being sponsored, or you have a bit more of work experience than the traditional MBA candidate, and you know that you can definitely keep going right after you graduate from Columbia into the next part of your career without that internship, then J-term could be a really great option for you. So J-term typically will have the application go open probably in June, if not a little bit earlier now, and then have their final deadline in October. And then you get admitted over the next couple of months and then start in that January and graduate with the students that start in fall of 23. So the other one is IMD. IMD actually has has two different application processes. One is that you can apply through the regular rounds and apply to the IMD MBA program, or you can do a light application and get admitted if you go through the assessment challenge and prove yourself worthy of admission. Then usually there's also some sort of scholarship attached to that, and you get admitted to the program. And then you just have to fill out it's just a technicality of filling out the rest of the application. So that's a few caveats. Any questions before I move on to the next section of our presentation? I've talked a lot. No questions? Okay, awesome. So let's move on then. So preparing for your applications. So what you'll need to apply are going to be some of the very easy parts are the actual forms themselves. So the registration fee and your undergrad degree transcripts and your TOEFL. So those are kind of like submitting the application itself, filling out the paperwork. And then you need to take the GMAT or GRE for most schools. There's a couple caveats to this. So some schools will also accept the executive assessment as well as the GMAT or GRE and count them equally. And then some schools actually offer a waiver for the GMAT or GRE. We can talk more in depth about those specific schools on a one-on-one basis, but there definitely are some opportunities. If you don't feel like the GMAT or GRE are for you, we can talk about some other options. Now, the really intense part of the application is, actually completing the online application and filling out all these little short answers, filling in all of your grades, yay, submitting your CV or your resume. And then some schools can have one essay like HBS or 7 essays like INSEAD. And then most of them need 1 to 2 letters of recommendation. And so this can definitely take some time. So when you're trying to plan out what you need to do next, here's kind of a little bit of a breakdown of what you need to do. And so, get that GMAT and GRE out of the way. Then we can focus on the actual application and you can do the easy stuff in the background while we're getting things moving through the process here. Any questions about these application parts? All right. So we'll be moving on. So I kind of want to draw things out for you so you can kind of see this in real time of what you should be doing. So let's say that you are planning to apply for the fall 24 start of a full-time MBA program. Round 1 typically is going to come in September. Round 2 is going to come in January, and round 3 usually happens around March, April. And again, there's some caveats to this. So, the European schools have more rounds, and then some schools have that January intake. So I did mention Columbia having the January start, but so does NCOD as well as HEC Paris, IESC. There's a couple others that are definitely in there, as well as the Canadian schools that actually have a January or spring intake as well. So if that's something you're interested in, we can definitely dive into that as well. Okay, so I also wanted to draw out kind of a bit of a timeline for you. For if you're wanting to apply to round one, obviously get that GMAT GRE done. Then, July to September, we really want to work on the application components, your essays, your resume, getting those letters of recommendation from your bosses or previous bosses. And then you'll submit your application by those September/maybe October deadlines. And then you'll get your interview invite between October and November, and then decisions come out in December. Now, let's say that you're not ready yet and you want to apply in round two. Again, that kind of moves our timeline a little bit. You want to make sure you get that GMAT GRE done by October and start working on your essays and the application between September and January. Get that invite in February, March, and then you would get your offer shortly after, sometimes March, April. So if you said, hey, Jen, I want to apply to the typical number of schools, which is usually 5 to 7 schools that people will apply to. And how do I do it? Do I apply to all schools in round one, or do I apply to some in round one and round two? What do I do? So everybody has a different plan. And I think it really depends on you specifically and how you rank the schools in your list and what your priority is. However, if you decide to split them, you'll notice that before you get your decision from schools in round one, you need to start your applications in round two. So it's a bit of a staggered approach. And, there might be a possibility that you start working on applications in round two, not knowing if you, one, got an interview, or two, got an admit, but they will, you'll have to kind of take a leap of faith, but you don't necessarily have to submit them. So let's say that you're like, I'm Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, all in, but I also want some backup schools. So you apply to Harvard, Stanford, Wharton during round one, and then you don't know until December. Then you can decide, okay, well, I don't want to apply to my backup schools if I got into one of them. The other option is to start off easier, apply to some of the backup schools, gain a little bit of confidence in the process, and then maybe potentially get admitted in round one, and then submit higher level schools during round two. So any questions? See, Selby's in there kind of helping add in a little bit of videos. All right. So that's kind of my go-to on how to submit your applications. Today's presentation is a little bit shorter than normal, a lot less questions during the process, but tell me, what questions do you have? I'm here to help you with any questions about application cycles, anything that you might have questions about for MBAs. Okay, while we wait for some questions to come in, please ask me some. So while we wait for the questions to come in, I'll just tell you that we're super excited because Stanford actually published their materials this week, or published their announcement that their application questions are going to change from last year to this year, and they set their dates for September. So we already are kind of getting on the board and starting to map out plans. If Stanford is on your list of schools that you're most interested in, you can go ahead and get started knowing for sure that you've got the right questions and essays to be working on. And then a little something else about Stanford, since we're on the topic. A lot of people are like, oh, Stanford's only has like 2 or 3 questions. And I'm like, oh no, there's a few more. And they're like, oh, but they're optional. And it's like, yeah, actually you should, unless it's like so there's an additional essay, right? For most schools, they'll say, is there anything else that you need to tell the committee? And so you would, anything that's maybe about a grade or GPA grades, anything about a work gap, anything like that you want to address, or anything you think the committee might have questions about, you want to address in that additional essay. But if there's an optional essay, you absolutely want to use that opportunity to share more about who you are. That will also give, in this specific instance, Stanford a little bit more about you, a little insight about you, about whether you're willing to go the extra mile and fill out the optional essay and tell them more. So it's a little bit more for you to kind of consider. Definitely do the optional essays. Okay, KP, is it too late to apply for full-time MBA at 37? So not exactly. So the traditional full-time MBA programs, 2-year MBA programs, you're definitely going to be a bit over their typical years of work experience and age average. But there are MBA programs that are specific to people who maybe are mid-career. So there's really like 4 or 5 options. But if we're talking about full-time, there's going to be Stanford MSX is a master's program. It's 1 year for people who have 8 years of experience or more. Foster Global EMBA has a full-time program for, and I think the average age is between 35 and 37. USC iBear has an MBA program that's, again, the mid-career. RSM is a great, Rotterdam School of Management is another great option. And then you could also consider part-time experiences online, part-time in person, or even an executive MBA, depending on the work experience you have. Okay, next question. How is the application process different for international candidates residing inside the U.S. versus someone who has to come to the U.S. in terms of fee and acceptance chances? Is I-20 still needed? Okay, great question. As far as being an international student already in the U.S., it gives you your application a boost in a couple of different ways. One is that you have this international experience and you're already here. You've been working in this international environment, maybe studied in an international environment. That definitely boosts your profile. Being here in the US will also give you somewhat of a boost in the fact that if it's hard for candidates from your country to get a visa to come study in the US, then you're already here, so your embassy is likely to grant that. The other thing is that you might not have to return home. So one advantage is, I think, for that is, like, especially if you're applying in round 3, 4, you definitely have that advantage of saying, I'm here, I'm ready, I don't have to return home. So I'm an easy international student to add at the end of the application cycle. But you still may need you're definitely going to need an I-20. You'll still go through the visa process exactly the same way that an international student would. There are some caveats to, which embassy you go to. If you might want to navigate that process with an international lawyer to kind of help you with the visa process. But there definitely is, you will definitely still go through the visa process to be sponsored by the specific school, because your I-20 has to be transferred from one school to the next. Awesome. Okay. Saniga. Okay. So I'm from Indonesia. Does any top school in the US require face-to-face interview instead of Zoom Skype? I've heard schools in UK prefer. Okay. So great question. COVID, for all the worst things that it's done, has made things a lot more flexible, and schools are definitely way more open to doing Zoom, Skype, or virtual interviews. And so for the most part, they don't require you to travel. If you can make it, then awesome. That gives them an even more buy-in from you, but you don't have to travel to do the actual interview itself. So don't feel like that's going to hold you back. For the most part, schools are going to be very open to you doing a Skype or virtual interview. Again, if you are really planning on attending that school, or maybe applying to multiple schools in that region, then maybe you could visit LBS, Oxford, Cambridge, if you're going to the UK, all at the same time, and kind of gain points with the admissions committees for visiting all of them, even if you didn't have an interview at all of them at the same time. Okay, KP, Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, Booth, Tuck, full-time MBA won't accept Indian applicants at 37 years. So I would not say that they don't. I will say that it's rare that they do. So KP, a lot of this has to do a lot more with your background, and I'm happy, like, email me and we can definitely talk a little bit more about this. But essentially, an MBA program is looking to give you the foundations of business and help you move on in your career. And they need to do that at a level where everybody is kind of in a similar stage. So if the average age of the cohort is closer to 27, maybe 29, they have had, anywhere between 2 and 5 years of work experience. And you would have, almost double that amount of work experience than some of them. And so their classes are not going to meet what you need, even though getting a degree from Harvard will absolutely boost your profile. It's not necessarily going to be exactly what you're needing in your career. So I'll say that, like, they don't like a lot of disparity in the age range, but there are exceptions to the rule. It depends on, if you've been working or being, if you've been in like a PhD program, things like that, if you're sponsored, a lot of other kind of factors go into that. So again, happy to talk offline about MBA over 30. Now that there's some changes in the rankings and overall job atmosphere in the US, how do they affect the chance of acceptance of international candidates for the next admission cycle? Okay, so I would say that this really impacts you as the actual applicant itself, right? You need to as the applicant, you need to understand what the current work environments are so that you're speaking to the committee and saying, hey, I understand the culture. I've done the research. I know that things are shifting. So one, I'm open to working in person. Maybe like in the US, it's kind of a big thing right now. A lot of people are fighting returning from remote work to the office. But that like you really like that atmosphere and you thrive being in person. I don't know if you necessarily have to say that in your essays or anything like that, but it can come out in some part of the interview or something. But the other part is to say, like, that the different landscape of jobs is shifting. So a lot of the tech jobs are having layoffs right now, but not all of them. So the streaming industry is booming and hiring. Like I have a candidate that I'm working with right now, and he said that they're hiring left and right at Paramount Plus. So there's definitely some parts of that industry that are definitely still hiring and being prosperous during this time. And this might even change in the next 2 years. So what you need to do as a candidate is tell them that you're flexible, right? Like, so giving them like, hey, I have a plan B, maybe a plan C or D. What I want to do is, I want to get the MBA to get this, experience in leadership. And I want to be able to boost my profile this way so that I can work in this type of environment at a company like Google, Apple, Netflix, whatever it might be, so that you show them, hey, I know that things are changing and I'm open to that change and I'm ready to be adaptable. Good question. All right. 550 GMAT score is a good mark to get admissions at a good university. So 550 is a bit below most of the top MBA programs average GMAT score. I'm sure that GMAT Club has it, ARINGO has it. A lot of the websites will have, kind of the class profile for each one of the top MBA programs. 550 is a little bit out of that range. It could be better for schools like maybe in Canada, depending on a bit more of your background. But 550 is a little bit on the lower side. But we can also talk about the potential of taking the GRE or even applying to schools that have a GMAT GRE waiver. Again, happy to talk offline with more specifics about your profile afterwards. All right, COG. For applicants who are straight out of college with no real work experience and a few internships with a good GPA and GMAT scores, what's the likelihood of getting into a top MBA program? Okay, so this kind of goes back to looking at the class profile for each one of these schools. They're mostly going to be requiring at least 2 years of work experience at the time of application, which means when you start or matriculate the program, you'll have 3 years of work experience. And they want you to have this so that they can see you've been exposed to different parts of the business. So you understand that, like, even though you might be in engineering, that there is a marketing department, there's a finance department, and how they all kind of work together, so that when you get into those foundational classes, you understand what they're talking about and have a little bit of a connection to make that point. All right, next question. All right. So, and I'm sorry, let me go back and say, you may want to look into a master's in management program. So they require little work experience, if any, so you can go straight into them without having any work experience, post grad or very little, and they're going to give you those foundations. And most of the time when you have a master's in management, you could apply for an accelerated MBA program later. So it's also a good option. Like, it doesn't rule out an MBA for the future. It gives you another option, especially if you feel like you don't have enough acceleration in your career right now to really get started. And you're like, I'm just going to be, plugging away at my desk in my cubicle, not really doing much that's going to help me get towards my goal. You could consider the master's in management programs instead of maybe applying to MBA programs where you don't have enough experience yet. All right. So next question from Sanaga. Do you recommend applying with only having 2.5 years of work experience at the time of application? So I think I just covered that pretty much. So you can definitely apply to top programs with 2.5 years of work experience. What they're going to want to see is some career growth. So they'll want to see 1 or 2 promotions over the time, or even like increases in your responsibility or leadership. I've done a BBA from a finance group, but I have experience in NGO, actually not from finance group. Roma Kaparsh. Okay, so thank you for giving more context to your profile. Again, I think that, depending on the schools that you're most interested in, we can kind of determine which schools would be a good fit for you with either your current GMAT score or without the GMAT score, or what we would need, where you would need to be to get in range for the schools that you're looking for. Ashita, how much weightage do top 15 MBA programs do to your CGPA? Okay, so good question about GPA versus GMAT score. So what this MBA programs overall are looking for is your academic readiness for the program. And that can be demonstrated through your CGPA or GPA plus your GMAT or GRE score. So let's say that you have a little bit of a lower GPA. You can balance that out with having a little bit of a higher GMAT or GRE score. So the other thing is that we know with Indian candidates that the class topper might even not have a 9 out of 10 CGPA. So being able to maybe give some context to a 6.8 out of 10, if you were in the top 10 or 15% of your class, you'll want to add that to your resume, top 10% or top 15%. And if it's not, then let's not include it on your resume. We'll just include it in the application itself. And then if there was something that caused you to have a lower GPA during your undergrad experience, then using that optional essay to share with the committee, hey, I had an obstacle. This is what happened, and this is how I've learned from it, and this is how I've recovered, and how I will do well in the future at your program is what they're looking for. So again, a lot of individual kind of feedback based on experiences, but in general, that's what they're going to be looking for. Which schools have a GMAT waiver? So we don't know yet, but some schools will be offering them. So this past cycle, I know that McCombs did. So Texas McCombs, believe that Cornell Johnson did as well. Some schools offered them at the end of round one, beginning of round two, because of the tech layoffs. So caveat to that, right? Like if you had to have been laid off to get the waiver. So that was from Kellogg. And then I'm not exactly sure. I have a list on our website of the schools that did have a waiver last year or that don't even require the GMAT or GRE. Some schools actually waive the GMAT or GRE if you have a CFA. So, there's a lot of different options there. And I can send you that list if you email me. What is a good strategy when filling up our basket with B school? This year, I got most of my rejections from safe schools I applied to rather than dream schools. So I'm assuming what you're asking, AI, is that you're wondering about, like, how do you make your list between reach or stretch schools, target schools, and safety schools? I don't know a lot about your profiles to know exactly how things went, and again, happy to talk offline about it, but you'll want to look at the class profile. I know that this is like super black and white, but this is an easy way to start looking at what would be considered a reach school versus a target school versus a safety school. And a lot of that's going to be the class profile. How many years of work experience, what sector or domain do they usually come from, what's their average GMAT or GRE. Those are the things that can help you with deciding which schools go in those buckets. Caveat is if you're coming from India or maybe a white male in finance, you're going to be overrepresented in the applicant pool. So you'll need to kind of ratchet things up a little bit, and knowing that you will have to compete against more people with a very similar profile. So what you might think as a target school might actually be a reach only because of the sheer number of people with a similar background. Now, the caveats to this would be, let's say that you have a very specific background. And I'm trying to think of like what it might be. Like, let's say that you've worked in the oil field, whether that's in like management or like actually as engineering. And let's say that you've worked in that field and technically your GMAT score is a little bit lower, but you have a perfect fit for like a school like UT McCombs. And so, they could be more of a target school because you have the experience that they're looking for. That's a really good match. And that would be helping you with getting a job after you graduate. Okay. So Naga, realistically, how many months do you think we should allocate for essay and letter and recommendation preparations? So I would say 3 to 4 months, honestly. And that's, kind of without help. 3 to 4 months to put things together. If you decide to work with ARINGO or another consulting firm, you can have a bit more direction and help with aggregating your story amongst the different applications. We're not going to copy and paste though. And that's like the number one no-no is you never want to copy and paste an essay from one school to the next. They can tell that you just changed a couple of key parts, right? So what I always tell clients is that, if you're wanting to reuse the same story, rewrite it for that school specifically in mind. You could still use the same story, but we want to craft it so that it fits that specific school, which might actually include a little bit of research. So, getting to know the school and what's important to it, what kind of concentrations or clubs or activities that they have on campus is important for you as an applicant, because you're trying to profess to them that they're the right fit for you. They're your number one choice and you need to be admitted there. And they're asking, how do you know? And then how do we know that you know, right? So the way that you can easily start to answer that question is by doing research and speaking to people who are currently in the program or alumni, right? So look through your network and see who you know that can give you the insights to the program. If not, I have a homework document on how to do your research that I'm happy to share. Again, just email me and let me know what you need, and I have a lot of documents already made up. Letters of recommendation. Okay, great question. So letters of recommendation need to be professional. So I had somebody submit to a list of different bosses that they've had. And then they said, but my German teacher would be a really great fit. And it's like, right. So they want somebody who's worked with you in a professional setting to be able to reference how you will do in the MBA program itself. So unless like you are an international interpreter or something like that, like where, the academic reference would be really relevant, for the most part, they're going to want somebody who's worked with you and supervised you and knows you very well. So I have a lot of clients who say, oh, I know, the SVP of marketing, and I could get a reference, but he doesn't really know me. And I'm like, okay, well, actually, your manager is going to be a better reference because they know you, what you've done, what you've accomplished, versus, your SVP being like, I looked at their HR file and everything looks great. Like giving a very generic letter of recommendation is not helpful. So they're more looking for the quality versus the ranking of the recommender themselves. Okay. What are some of the ways in which an international candidate can try to demonstrate interest while applying? So I think that, again, going back to doing your research is really important. If you have anybody that was from your batch that attended any of these programs, that's going to be really helpful for you in a couple of ways. So, or somebody who worked with you in the past, like if you work for a consulting firm, most of the time there's a strong path of people going to a top MBA program. So you can look and see who has graduated or who attended an MBA program from your firm. And if not, then you'll want to do some networking. And I would say that you need to do that now. A lot of MBA candidates are going to be either graduating early June or starting their internship in early June. So right now is the right time to kind of catch them, to make sure that you can make a connection and get some information from them till they're kind of MIA for a little while, getting used to their new surroundings. So doing that research and being able to show them like, hey, I want to go to this school because of this class, this event, this professor, this club. These are the things that say, I understand your school and I am ready to be on campus and make a difference, and sharing how you plan to make, how to contribute to the classroom and be a part of the productive cohort. Okay. Any other questions? These are great. All right. So just in case you do have other questions, we are having a Q&A on the chat tomorrow, the online chat for GMAT Club Forum. So if you have any questions, you can also ask them there. But beyond that, I think we might be good for the day. Again, please, please, please feel free to email me with any questions that you have. I'm here to help and happy to share more information. I've been in admissions for the past 10 years, and I love helping people with this next step. So please reach out if you need anything. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. All right. Have a great day. Thanks. Bye.